set. I want to thank everyone for joining the Darien Library and the Jewish Historical Society of Fairfield County tonight to discuss Hanukkah, its tradition and its celebration, with Phil Schechter and Liz Roll, and Elisa Kaplan is going to introduce them. Elisa?
Okay, thank you, Pat. So yes, my name is Elisa Kaplan, and I'm president of the Jewish Historical Society of Fairfield County. And so I bring you greetings from the society. We are the home for Jewish memories, and we tell the Jewish story in Fairfield County. A very special thanks to the Darien Library for hosting this virtual program. We have a long and very special relationship with the Darien Library. Our last program here was the musical ethos of Israel with Dr. Gil Harrell. Can you believe that? And we were actually present in the library. I think I might even know what it looks like these days. I still remember. Pat, it's always a pleasure working with you, Pat Sherry, head of adult programming. And it's nice to meet Amanda DeMeo and work with you now, the adult program librarian. Darien has great professionals there at work and making this library work for us and for the community. A very special thank you to Marcy Schoenfeld, our Vice President for Education and Programming, who produced this program on our end tonight. So a few commercials before we begin. We have a Yiddish program once a month, and that's happening tomorrow at 10 a.m. on Zoom. And we have book talks once a month, book talk session. And on December 9th, we're going to continue the Hanukkah theme with Jonathan Fass reviewing the book, The Menorah, From the Bible to Modern Israel. So we're really getting in the swing of things. And oh, by the way, it's easy to find our programs. Just go to your Google or Firefox or browser line and type in the Jewish Historical Society of Fairfield County. And just like Darien Library, we pop right up. So you can, and our programs are right on our front page of our website. So it's almost like magic. So our presentation tonight is very timely and particularly appropriate. So where's my gift? No, just kidding. Hanukkah actually starts a week from tonight. And we know from the scholarly work, Game of Thrones, that winter is coming. So, and we're almost at the time of the winter solstice, the darkest time of the year. Hanukkah could not come at a better time. We need you, Hanukkah. So this evening, we are fortunate to have two Hanukkah gurus. Oh no, that's another group. Two Hanukkah specialists who will tell us everything we wanted to know about Hanukkah. We are so fortunate to have Rabbi Liz Raleigh and Rabbi Phil Schechter with us tonight. Rabbi Raleigh was ordained at the Hebrew Union College for the Jewish Institute for Religion. She served as a rabbi and an educator for over, it says here, Liz, 4 decades. Oh my, you know, she started it at age 3. She's the owner of Senior Concierge Services and serves as chaplain at Stanford Hospital. And she coordinates the certificate program in gerontology and palliative care for Jewish clergy at Yeshiva University. Wurzweiler School of Social Work, where she earned her own certificate there. And on a personal note, Liz Raleigh is a fantastic cook. If you're ever invited to their house for a holiday, be sure you rush right over there because you will enjoy every minute of the conversation and the food. Rabbi Phil Schechter was born in the Bronx, And so, he was educated at the University of Cincinnati and the Hebrew Union College. He served as a traveling chaplain in the U.S. Air Force. Well, everybody travels in the Air Force. Okay. For 39 years, he served 29. Don't give you too many years. For 29 years, he served as rabbi of Temple Shari Emet in Manalapan, New Jersey, until his retirement in 2001. And if you think he's been just sitting around doing nothing since 2001, you're wrong. He's been a very, very busy person. He's in his 10th year there aren't too many rabbis who are rabbis of churches, but he's the rabbi in residence at Stanford's First Presbyterian Church, the Fish Church. He's also chaplain of the Stanford Jewish War Veterans, and he serves as a Reform representative on the Jewish Welfare Board, Jewish Chaplains Council, the National Military Jewish Chaplain endorsing agency for the Department of Defense. And he's also Fellowship Director of Senior Men's Association of Stanford. And on a personal note, if you want to know anything about the Stanford Nature Center, he's there almost every day. He's a great walker and hiker and can tell you all about it. And another thing you might not know about Phil Schechter is that he knows everybody who's in a history book in civil rights. He was very active and is still in the civil rights movement, and the people he knows are all in history books. They're all famous. They're all in television. So you were part of a very important, and still are, both of you, a part of very important work here in our country and in our world. But I do have a question. What's it like to have two rabbis in one house? Two authorities. So you may see some of that tonight. We'll see how that plays out. It is indeed a pleasure to introduce two dear friends and people I greatly admire as scholars and as great spiritual leaders. Take it away, Liz Raleigh and Phil Schechter, Rabbi and Rabbi.
Thank you, Lisa. I hope our presentation is as good as your introduction. We had thought to do this as a sort of Q&A session. There are a couple of slides involved, but mostly Q&A. And I think I'm supposed to start. All right. So, Phil.
Yes, Liz.
Is Hanukkah the Jewish Christmas?
You know, when we were invited, and I want to thank Amanda for a very wonderful list of how to prepare for this evening, and for Pat for the very warm reception. And Lisa, you're always fun. I learn a lot about myself when I listen to you. We anticipated, since it was at the Darien Library, that there'd probably be a number of people who are not Jewish who are going to tune in to find out about their Jewish neighbors and what this holiday is all about. And the first question that probably would come up, that I hear often in my work at the church, is Hanukkah must be the Jewish Christmas, because interestingly enough, they do share the number in the calendar. Both of them are on the 25th day. Christmas on the 25th day, of course, of December, and Hanukkah on the 25th day of the month of Kislev, which is in the Jewish lunar calendar. We'll hear more about the two calendars a bit later, but they actually are not similar in their origin at all. And if some would say that if it weren't for Hanukkah, which occurred about 165 years BC, before Jesus, there wouldn't have been a Christmas story. And maybe as we discuss the history of Hanukkah, you'll understand why I say that. So, shall we move on with the next question?
Sure.
Why does, oh, you want to skip to that question? Okay. What does Hanukkah commemorate? So that you'll understand why
Right.
I said
why we're
it's not the Jewish Christmas.
great. So I'm going to share my screen and
There
there
we
we
go.
go. So I thought many people can tell the Hanukkah story from memory, with or without some details here and there. Even non-Jews can tell the story of Hanukkah if they've heard it read. So I thought I would give you a little bit of historical context. This is actually a map of Abraham's travels. It was a little before the time of the Maccabees, but Abraham started down here in Ur, and he traveled to Haran, and then he traveled through what was then Canaan and into Egypt. And then he went back to Canaan where he settled. So this is actually an old trade route. And being in control of this route for a government could be very, very auspicious, and also raise a lot of cash because they would be in charge of the tolls and the trade taxes and so on. So that's just a sense of why the Middle East is the way it is, that this control of this route is very advantageous. And apologies, let's try that. No, it's not going to work. All right. At some point, Amanda may share her screen, and I will. I'll just talk without the next slide. So, in the time of Alexander the Great, he conquered across all of this, all the way out to here, and all the way down to Egypt. And the next slide, if we see it, is just a slide of all of the territory that he conquered. So Alexander the Great in 333 to 336, 336 to 333 BCE, which is a Jewish way of saying before the Common Era, as we count it usually. He crossed the entire Middle East and took over many different peoples. He was, however, very tolerant, and he allowed the Jews and many other peoples to maintain their own culture, their own religion, and so on, as long as they paid the taxes. When he died, there was a battle for control, and Seleucus took this part of the empire, the big part, and Ptolemy took the Egyptian side of the territory. And the problem is that Judea right here is always the battleground for control, mostly of this route. So there was an ongoing tug of war between the Seleucids and the Ptolemies over time, many years, back and forth and back and forth. Finally, the Seleucids, who were in charge here, took over Judea. And they, at the beginning, were okay, but they became much less tolerant. And at some point, they told the Jews that they could no longer follow their own rules, and that they had to take on Greek culture. So there were Jews who were happy to take on Greek culture. They were the Hellenists, the Hellenistic Jews, and there were Jews who rejected Greek culture. Among them, Mattathias and his 5 sons, including Judah the Maccabee, and they launched a rebellion. The rebellion was against the Seleucids on one hand, but it also was a rejection of the position of the Hellenistic Jews. So there's some aspect of this that is a civil war. Finally, they were, in fact, victorious, as Phil said, in about 165 BCE. They actually gained control over the area of Judea, and they rededicated the temple in Jerusalem, which had been corrupted by the Greeks. They rededicated it, and it's that rededication of the temple that we celebrate when we commemorate, when we observe Hanukkah. So, so what do we do on Hanukkah?
Well, some holidays require attendance virtually or in reality by your presence in the religious institution. But Hanukkah never required that. Hanukkah is a home holiday. Every family or every person celebrates, who observes Hanukkah, celebrates it at home by lighting candles. And interestingly enough, the form of the candle lighting apparatus is called a menorah, which reminds us of, this is a particular one that was made by a Holocaust survivor. It's a replica of one that he made while imprisoned in a concentration camp. And he gave a copy of it to my temple in Alapin, New Jersey, a much larger version. This is one that he gave to me personally. Our kids had their own in different shapes, and this is certainly a different shape with working parts. And when they were very young, of course, they enjoyed it. But if you go far enough back, Hanukkah has been observed for a very long time. So the menorah that's used for Hanukkah has 9 placeholders for candles. The menorah that is a symbol of Judaism, and if Liz's slides were working, she'd have a slide showing you the very famous menorah carried by Jewish prisoners, slaves who were brought to Rome. And the Arch of Titus, just outside the, what's the big arena in Rome called? Anybody?
Colosseum.
The Colosseum. Not within view of the Colosseum, there's this huge arch called the Arch of Titus. Titus was the general who conquered Judea. And there's a depiction of the slaves carrying a huge menorah, which was captured from the temple in Jerusalem. Usually it has 7 candles or 7 lights. The Hanukkah one, however, has 9. And you can see, whoops, candles just fell out. Luckily, they weren't kindled. Each night of Hanukkah, we add a candle. So it begins with one candle that serves as the servant candle to all the others, called the shamas. And then we add another candle the first night, another candle the second night, until eventually they're all ablaze, and hopefully the house isn't ablaze with it. And the place that we do this usually is at the front window to proclaim the miracle of the candle, the oil that was used in lighting the ancient temple, which had been desecrated by the conquering
Romans. By then it was the Romans.
Well, the Romans later, but first
the Greeks.
The Greeks. All right, so it's a holiday that increases light, and you notice that when Lisa first introduced us, she talked about the winter solstice, the darkest time of the year. It's really interesting how in India, the festival of Diwali, which requires the lighting of candles, and they're placed on miniature boats in the river. Christmas is certainly a holiday of lights. You could almost see our neighbor's lights through the window. It's a wonderful time seeing the lights of Christmas, but for the Jews, we light these candles in increasing amounts. There was a great debate among the ancient rabbis. There was one school of thought which thought, since Judaism was so terrific and wonderful in the past, we should start with all the lights glowing and then take one away each night. And then the opposing school of argument under the great Rabbi Hillel said, since the future should become brighter, we add a candle each night, and therefore the Hanukkah, the menorah, becomes lighter and lighter every night of Hanukkah.
So, and why 8 nights?
Why 8 nights?
This was an unrehearsed question.
Yeah, because when the Jews returned to the temple in Jerusalem and wanted to kindle the light that was in the menorah there wasn't enough oil remaining that was consecrated to keep it going. And according to tradition, a miracle occurred, and the oil lasted not for 1 night, not for 2 nights, not for 3 nights, but for 8 nights. And that's why we have 8 nights of Hanukkah. The additional 9th candle is the one that lights all the others.
So Jewish tradition has a long, long history of argumentation like lawyers and interpretation. And I'd like to offer a different interpretation of the 8 candles, the 8 nights of Hanukkah. When we read the book of Maccabees, actually, none of that story that you just told appears in the book of Maccabees at all.
Where do you find the book of Maccabees? It's not in the Darien library.
Well, it probably is in the Darien library. The book of Maccabees is not in our Bible, not in the Hebrew Bible. Strangely enough, it does appear due to the Roman Catholic inclusion of Maccabees in their Bible. And so as popular as the holiday is, the story was excluded, in fact, actively excluded from our Bible. And for reasons that I may explain a little bit later. But in the book of Maccabees, at the end of the first book of Maccabees, we get a story that with the rededication of the temple, the people came out and waved palm leaves. And some of you may be aware that palm leaves are used in the Jewish celebration of Sukkot, the Feast of Tabernacles, as it's called. And the palm leaves, which we see also in the story of Jesus, are a sign that in the book of Maccabees, what we learn is at the time of Sukkot, the Feast of Tabernacles, which would have been 2 months earlier, they didn't have access to the temple to do all of the right things. So they celebrated this holiday 2 months late and used the rededication of the temple to celebrate with the palm leaves that they would have used 2 months earlier had they been able to, because the holiday of Sukkot is actually extremely important. The end of the book of Maccabees is all about that. And then a note that in this story is, in fact, this story as it's told there is actually sort of a letter to the Jews of Egypt telling them that they too should celebrate this great victory and rededication of the temple in Jerusalem. So Sukkot is 8 days, and that is, at least as the book of Maccabees records, seems to be the original reason that Hanukkah had 8 days, or the alternative explanation.
There is a lot of confusion about when Hanukkah occurs, because this year it's very early. In the ancient days of people shopping for Christmas at malls, the Jews were very lucky in a year like this one, where Hanukkah is over and done even before Christmas starts. So why are the dates fluctuating all the time? How come we say Hanukkah is very early this year? In fact, we haven't gotten all our gifts together for our kids.
Earlier, Phil said it's on the 25th of Kislev, just like Christmas is on the 25th of December. It is always on the 25th of Kislev, so it doesn't change at all. It's always the same date. It's simply that we're operating on a different calendar. And it was many, many years before humans figured out how to fix their calendars so that they stayed with the seasons.
The Muslims still have a problem.
That's right. That's why Ramadan keeps moving around the calendar, because they have a lunar calendar, and because the moon cycle is never 31 days. So it's always shorter than that. It's 28, 29, 30, but never 31. So if you're comparing it to our calendar, the Gregorian calendar, it never matches up. The Hebrew calendar is a little bit different from that. It's also a lunar calendar, so the months are a little bit too short. But they figured out about 1,400 years ago, they figured out that if they added an extra month into the calendar every so often, strangely enough, 7 times every 19 years,
Or
which
every
is
2 or 3 years.
right, that they could fix the calendar to stay with the seasons as it was supposed to be. So Hanukkah does vary compared to the Gregorian calendar, and it can go back and forth about 3 weeks at the most in variation with the Gregorian calendar, but it stays roughly, the end of the first week of December to starting maybe as late as Christmas, maybe. So that's kind of its range. But at least when we light our candles, it's always during the darkest part of the year.
Now, with the candles, we are supposed to say blessings. There are 3 blessings for Hanukkah on the first night. First blessing thanks God for commanding us to kindle the lights of Hanukkah. The second blessing calls attention to the miracle that occurred in those days, in ancient days, at this time of year. And the final blessing is the blessing that is recited to thank God for the gift of life, that we're still alive, we've been sustained and kept alive into this very moment. That blessing becomes especially appropriate during this pandemic time. You could say a blessing like that virtually every day.
Yeah, I was just going to say that. I think it works every single day at the moment.
And we thank God for the gift of life and for being sustained on this planet. So the people will recite the blessings as they light the candles, and that is the special requirement for Hanukkah. It is not a holiday equal to other Jewish holidays where people actually stay home from work or from school because it's a holy observance. Hanukkah is not considered with that kind of status. It's a home holiday, and the only time that it is observed is while the candles are actually kindled and offering brightness to the house.
There's an interesting tradition that women don't work during the time that the candles are burning. And it's not clear why that tradition arose, but one explanation is that the Hanukkah candles are not meant to be used for light. They are not meant to be used at all. They are there solely for observance. And so women in the home might take advantage of the Hanukkah lights to see their work, and therefore they stop working during the period that the candles burn. The candles that we use now, which of course are wax, originally they were oil lamps, but these candles burn anywhere from half an hour to maybe 45 minutes. If you put them in a warm room, they melt faster, and in a cold room, they'll melt more slowly. Sometimes in some families, when the candles are lit and the blessings are said, very often they will join in a song. Right?
And I thought if we could persuade Liz to do it, you might want to hear a couple of the songs of Hanukkah.
When I was a child, I remember very well that, excuse me just a moment, we're going to run out of power.
Okay.
Sorry, we were warned not to do that, but and we thought we had taken care of it. We didn't take it, still didn't take care of it. There we go. Sorry. I remember as a child, as a Girl Scout, for example, singing Christmas carols to the commuters as they got off the train. And I know all the words to all the Christmas carols. And I know that many of them are very serious because it is a solemn time. If Christmas is taken seriously, the people who take it with its religious meaning is a very solemn and important time. So Hanukkah is not a solemn time at all. It is a celebration. It's a celebration of victory for against religious persecution. And the songs for Hanukkah tend to be pretty upbeat and a little folky, as really. So everybody knows, I have a little dreidel, I made it out of clay, and when it's dry and ready, then dreidel I shall play. Oh, dreidel, 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 oh, dreidel I shall play. Oh, dreidel, dreidel, dreidel. Whatever the last line is, which just escaped me.
And here
yes.
is a dreidel.
So that's sort of the mood of Hanukkah. Right?
But it is a fun time for kids to play this dreidel game by spinning the top. You see it has 4 letters on it. Nun, Gimel, He, Shin. Whoops. Thanks, Liz. And what this is an abbreviation for Nes Gadol Haya Sham. A great miracle occurred there. The miracle of finding enough oil to last for 8 nights. But it also, in Yiddish, can be a game, so that if kids are spinning the dreidel and they're using pennies or M&Ms or
raisins,
Tootsie Rolls as the prize, the letters are interpreted as nothing for nun.
You don't do anything.
Gimel, Gans, you get the whole pile of candy, or
right, because you have to ante up at the beginning.
Hal, Hey for halb, for half, you get half the pot, or Shin for Stella, which means you have to put into the pot. So it's a fun game that's played, very simple, very old game, probably goes back to almost to the beginning of Hanukkah. Nobody really knows.
Right.
But the difference between this dreidel and one made in Israel is, instead of it saying a great miracle occurred there, in Israel it says a great miracle occurred here.
We just don't happen to have an Israeli dreidel to share. So there are a couple of questions in the chat that I think maybe we should answer. Is the same prayer or song sung every night while lighting the candles? So the same prayers are said every night. The first 2 prayers, the third prayer is only said on the first night, the one about sustaining us to reach this season so that we are here to celebrate Hanukkah. But the other 2 are the same every single night. Many families will sing the exact same song every single night, and others will vary their repertoire. So that's, that's that.
Now I know we have this saying, Harry Golden used to say about Jewish groups, no eating, no meeting. If you don't eat, you can't have a meeting. So, and I know Christian groups are similar in many ways, the same for the same philosophy. And I'm sure all groups are. There are special foods for Hanukkah, is the point I'm trying to get to. And the special foods, the most famous one of all is called Latka. So Liz, you've been described as a fabulous cook. What is a latke?
Don't ask Phil to cook. A latke is a pancake. It's a potato pancake that was probably originated in Eastern Europe, where potatoes were plentiful.
And that was all that was plentiful.
Right, right. There's an approach to cooking Hanukkah food, which has to do with oil. Because of that legend about the oil burning, became a tradition to make food that needs oil to cook. So latkes in Eastern Europe were the perfect thing to make for Hanukkah. But in other parts of the world, the Jewish world, other foods are eaten. In Israel, they eat a particular kind of jelly-filled donut called a sufganiyah. And during the 8 days of Hanukkah, they sell them on the street, and you can get them many places. In some of the Eastern Jewish communities, they eat a kind of fried dough thing that's familiar to them. So it depends an awful lot on what's available. There's a theory that the original pancakes for Hanukkah actually had cheese in them, because there is a story related to Hanukkah. How did the Maccabees finally defeat the Greeks? A Jewish woman, Judith, took matters in her own hands. She somehow convinced the Greek guards on the other side of Jerusalem to let her speak to the Greek general. And she brought with her this large bag, and she entertained him with cheese and wine. And when he had enough to drink and he fell asleep, she cut off his head. And Judith is the subject of many famous pieces of art. You can see this story in action, as it were, in some very famous paintings. So and the Greek soldiers, when they realized they had no general, they had no leader, they all ran away. So there is this story, which is also, by the way, not in the Hebrew Bible, is because of the mention of cheese, because the cheese made him thirsty, so he would drink more wine. So cheese pancakes became, sort of cheese latkes. So you can make yours with cottage cheese if you want. So should we take some questions?
Sure.
Okay. So we're happy to answer other people's questions, not just our questions, and they can go really in any direction. So in the chat is fine. I don't know, Pat, can people unmute themselves?
Yes,
So
they just have
would,
to.
So Gail wants to know about the spelling of Hanukkah.
That is such a good question. It's spelled Chet,
Nun, Kaf, Hey.
Kaf, Hey, 4 letters in the Hebrew alphabet. And when you try to put Hebrew into English, it's really a matter of personal opinion. I can remember Hanukkah being spelled in my childhood, Chanukko, Hanukkah.
Or Hanukkah.
Liz is a real grammar
Fanatic.
maven, and she's very careful about words being properly spelled. So because Hebrew has a doubled letter and a grammatical requirement that that letter be doubled when a dot appears in it, how would you spell Hanukkah?
So here are the real issues. The first letter of Hanukkah in Hebrew has a ch sound. Very difficult for many Americans, even though many of them can say Bach, they just can't say Hanukkah. And that sound, it can be represented in many different ways. Some people actually use an H with a dot under it, but the typewriter doesn't really have that. The keyboard doesn't have that ability. CH, like Bach, is an accepted spelling. The problem is that if you're dealing with someone who is totally unfamiliar, you risk that they will say Chanukkah. So switching to the H is a way to at least move in the right direction. The K sound in the Hebrew word has this extra dot, and that in the details of Hebrew grammar is a doubling of the letter. And therefore, for people who are using trying to transcribe it to English, they will write it with 2 Ks to show that the Hebrew original is a doubled letter. So really spell it any way you want to.
Unless spell check on your computer takes over and
Yes, well, there's that.
does what it wants to do.
Is Hanukkah celebrated by all sections of Judaism? Do you know what I'm asking? Because there are Reform, there's conservative, there's Hasidic.
Right.
Yes.
It is celebrated across the Jewish community.
Okay.
There are some variations sometimes, and sometimes the attitude about how playful it's appropriate to be may change, but it's everybody lights candles, and everybody lights candles the same way.
Okay.
But your question is really good, because in the Hasidic community, the lighting of the candles and the eating of the latkes, yes, that's we have in common with everyone. But lavish gifts, decorations, the way, remember malls? Remember how malls were decorated for this season? Well, when I was in Israel, for one time during Hanukkah, I've been to Israel many times, but only once during Hanukkah, there were no decorations. The only way you'd know it was Hanukkah was on a couple of public buildings. There were huge menorahs or Hanukkahs with electric lights. But in the hotels where lots of Americans were staying, there were Christmas trees, but you wouldn't see any Christmas trees anywhere else except maybe in Bethlehem, which is certainly an appropriate place for there to be observance of Christmas. But it is not the kind of holiday where decorations and cards and gifts are such a big deal. That we learned in America.
Okay.
And I think all that occurred as a result of the way Jews saw Christians observe Christmas.
Oh, interesting. That's very interesting.
It's not a happy history.
No, it's not. that when the Hasmoneans won against the Greeks, they named themselves the rulers of Judea, one at a time, of course. And they gradually became, unfortunately, rather corrupt leaders. And they also, one generation at a time, became, in the end, pro-Greek. They became Hellenists, which is really an odd thing to have happened. And the Hellenists, not all the Jews, still then, not all the Jews wanted to be Hellenists. They didn't want to necessarily to embrace Greek culture. And they, again, wound up basically with a civil war again. The Jews who were the Hasmoneans, which is the dynasty from Judah Maccabee, the Hasmoneans allied themselves with the Romans, and the anti-Hellenists allied themselves with the Greeks. That's basically what happened. And there was a civil war in the Jewish community twice, in fact. And the second time, the Romans eventually came in and took over Judea. And they wiped out they removed Jewish rule and put in their own people. And there still continued to be civil strife among Jews. And finally, they revolted against Rome, and Rome just put the whole thing down and destroyed the temple in Jerusalem. So the people, the anti-Hellenists were, they won, and the Hellenists, the Hellenistic Jews had been at that point in charge of the temple. They lost all their power, and the anti-Hellenistic Jews became the spokespeople for a Judaism after the year of 70 CE, 70 AD. And effectively, the anti-Hellenists won. Because they were also anti-Hasmonean, they had been unhappy with the way the Hasmonean rule had gradually drifted into Hellenism. They, when they wrote the history, they wrote the Hasmoneans out. And that's how it turns out that the Maccabees is not in our Bible, because the people who made a decision about what should be in the Bible won. And they were so unhappy with what had happened with the Hasmonean dynasty that they just tried very hard to get rid of it. It didn't work. Somehow the people still remembered that there was some kind of a celebration, and the celebration probably was a folk celebration originally of some kind, but they tried to kind of quash it. Didn't work.
Thanks.
And Gail has a couple of people are asking about the order of lighting the candles and what's the right way to do it. And let's see, we have one that's, yes, we can. Okay, would you like to tell us about it?
The first candle is the shamas, or servant candle, which is used to light all the others. And so, whoops. without actually lighting them, the wax doesn't hold. But of course, once you heat them up a bit, so you just increase the order each night.
Right, so you light the candle, the newest candle, the one for the day. So this is the second candle we would light on the second night. So because this one is special on the second night, we light that one first, and then we light the one that represents the first night. So on the third night, we would add a third candle here. And whoops.
Not gonna fit, it might fit the dinosaur better.
It's, no, but he's here, here. Okay, so we start with the one for the third day, and then the one for the second day, and one for the first day. The tradition is to put the candles in the menorah, the Chanukkah, from right to left, and then to light them from left to right. How in official areas, in official places in Israel, for Hanukkah, you get some huge oversized Chanukkah on display.
Oh, Amanda would love to know if you would share your Latka recipe.
She's not asking you, Jerry.
Years ago, I organized an adult education program in a synagogue where I was working. We had a caterer teach us to make latkes the way he did. And ever since then, I've done what he does. And therefore, we most often eat sweet potato latkes with scallions instead of onions.
Wow.
And I'd be happy to share, and because he was a caterer, it's for every pound of sweet potatoes. So I'd be happy to share it. I don't know how I would do that. Amanda will tell us how I might do that after the fact.
Definitely, because we could, if you send it to us, we will send it out to everyone who came.
Happy to do
I would
that.
love to do that. Thank you.
Happy
I'm
to
excited.
do that. My son just asked for that recipe last week.
It must be very good.
They're delicious, and they are, it's this thing with the caterer, but they're eaten with honey mustard rather than applesauce. This may not meet the requirements of every family.
And I think Larry is asking about appropriate gifts for kids.
The most famous name for the gifts is Hanukkah gift. Small.
Oh, the chocolate money?
No.
No.
But good guess.
In the days when they were readily available, people used to give silver dollars because the word gelt actually means gold. But small gifts, one for each night. And so the kids get to say, Christmas is one big night of presents. And then the brother or sister will say, yeah, but we get them for 8 nights.
But it seems to, the whole gift giving thing in a Jewish context seems to have grown up from the very simple Eastern European custom of giving children nuts or raisins, and that's what they used to play dreidel. And that was their gambling money on the dreidel, right? So they were very poor people. They certainly weren't giving their children coins to play this game. So they gave them small foods that could be anti-dop and so on. And that may be how the gift giving got started in the Western Jewish world.
This has been wonderful and so informative. Thank you so much.
It was our pleasure.
Thank you, Pat.
Wonderful evening. Thank you.
And thank you to the Jewish Historical Society for inviting us and the Darien Library for hosting us. It was really lovely.
And a happy Hanukkah to everyone who is observing it, and a Merry Christmas to everyone who is observing Christmas.